I sat in the mahogany-paneled boardroom of Henderson Family Enterprises, my father's construction empire worth $300 million. My sister Jessica, the official VP of Operations, presented the $52 million casino expansion project to investors. When I quietly suggested reviewing the environmental impact studies, Jessica's voice dripped with condescension. April, honey, stick to your little side jobs. Leave real business to professionals. Our father Richard nodded approvingly. I continued taking notes silently, my phone buzzing with notifications from my investment portfolio management app. 6 months earlier, I had walked across the stage at Wharton Business School, graduating summa cum laude with dual degrees in finance and environmental economics. The weight of my accomplishments felt heavy in my hands as I held my diploma, knowing that my family saw it as nothing more than expensive paper. When I returned home to Denver requesting a formal position in Henderson Family Enterprises, my father dismissed my qualifications with a wave of his weathered hand. "Find your own path, April," Richard Henderson had said from behind his massive oak desk, the same desk where he had built his construction empire from the ground up 30 years ago. "Jessica has been handling the serious business while you were away playing student." Jessica had smirked from her position by the window, her designer suit perfectly tailored to project authority she had never truly earned. Her promotion to Vice President of Operations had been announced the day after my graduation, a deliberate slap that stung more than I cared to admit. The corner office that should have been mine now belonged to someone who had barely graduated from community college business courses. My stepmother Carol had tried to mediate during that uncomfortable family dinner, her gentle voice barely audible over Jessica's boasting about quarterly profit margins. She barely understood. April worked very hard for those degrees, Carol had offered weakly, only to be silenced by Richard's stern glance. What my family didn't know was that during my final semester at Wharton, I had received an unexpected inheritance. My grandmother, Helen, may she rest in peace, had left me $2 million in her will. Helen had always believed in my potential, unlike the rest of my family. She had whispered to me at her 90th birthday party that women in business needed to be twice as smart and work twice as hard to get half the recognition. I had used that inheritance wisely, connecting with my mentor, Dr. Patricia Wang, a former Goldman Sachs executive who now taught sustainable business practices at the university. Dr. Wang had opened my eyes to opportunities my family couldn't even imagine, introducing me to networks of investors who valued both profit and environmental responsibility. My so-called side jobs had started as consulting work for 3 green energy startups during my summer breaks. What began as part-time research had evolved into something far more substantial. While Jessica struggled with basic financial projections, I was analyzing market trends that would reshape entire industries. The irony was delicious, though I kept it to myself. The company attorney Marcus Webb had begun seeking my input on environmental compliance issues, though he was careful to do so away from family meetings. Marcus was a sharp man in his 50s who recognized intelligence when he saw it, even if my father remained blind to it. He'd started asking subtle questions about new federal regulations that Jessica dismissed as bureaucratic nonsense. During those early months back in Denver, I had noticed troubling patterns in Jessica's casino project proposals. The environmental impact assessments were suspiciously brief, lacking the depth required for projects of this magnitude. When I mentioned soil contamination concerns to Marcus during a chance encounter at the courthouse, his face had gone pale. "What kind of contamination?" he had asked, glancing around nervously. That question led me to dig deeper through Dr. Wang's connections in environmental law. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Jessica's chosen site for the casino expansion sat directly on land that the EPA had been quietly investigating for months. Underground storage tanks from a defunct gas station had been leaking petroleum products into the groundwater for decades. The revelation hit me like a physical blow as I sat in my modest apartment that evening, surrounded by environmental impact reports and soil analysis data. Jessica was about to destroy our family's business with her negligence, and she was too arrogant to listen to warnings. My apartment looked nothing like what my family expected. While they assumed I lived in poverty, surviving on whatever meager income my little side jobs provided, the reality was starkly different. 3 large monitors displayed real-time trading data, environmental impact assessment software, and communication platforms connecting me to investors across the globe. I placed a secure call to Thomas Mitchell Jr. at Beacon Capital Management, my investment director, who had been managing my growing portfolio with remarkable success. Thomas was a brilliant man in his early 40s who specialized in sustainable investing, exactly the kind of forward-thinking professional my family dismissed as unrealistic. April. Thomas's voice crackled through my encrypted phone line. Your renewable energy positions are performing exceptionally well. The solar panel manufacturer in California just secured a federal contract worth $200 million. Your early investment is now worth $12 million. Over the past 2 years, my careful investments had generated $52 million in profits. Cryptocurrency purchases made during market downturns, strategic positions in renewable energy companies, and stakes in technology startups focused on environmental solutions had created wealth beyond anything my family could imagine. The best part was that nobody suspected the quiet daughter living in a modest apartment could command such financial resources. My anonymous funding of environmental law firms investigating construction projects had been particularly satisfying. Through shell companies and careful legal structures, I had supported investigations that exposed unsafe building practices throughout Colorado. My investment in Morrison Construction, a rival company that specialized in sustainable building techniques, was positioning me perfectly for what I knew was coming. Family dinners had become exercises in restraint as I listened to Jessica boast about projected profits from the casino expansion. Her confidence was nauseating, especially knowing that she was building everything on contaminated land that would cost tens of millions to remediate. The environmental concerns are just liberal nonsense. Jessica had declared the previous Sunday cutting her stake with aggressive precision. Real business is about taking calculated risks, not worrying about every butterfly and blade of grass. Richard had nodded approvingly, his pride in Jessica's ruthless attitude evident in his beaming smile. That's the Henderson spirit, he had said, completely missing the irony that his other daughter was quietly outperforming Jessica in every meaningful metric. Carol had attempted to steer the conversation toward more pleasant topics, asking about my consulting work. When I mentioned helping a startup develop carbon-neutral building materials, Jessica had rolled her eyes dramatically. Carbon-neutral building materials, she had sneered. What's next, building houses out of recycled dreams? What Jessica didn't know was that the startup she was mocking had just received a $50 million investment from a consortium of international environmental funds. My consulting fee alone would exceed her annual salary, not counting my equity stake in the company. My meeting with environmental lawyer Sarah Morrison had confirmed my worst fears about Jessica's project. Sarah had shown me documentation proving that 3 other Henderson projects might violate new federal regulations scheduled to take effect within months. Jessica's habit of cutting corners on environmental compliance had created a legal time bomb that could destroy everything my father had built. The EPA has been building cases against construction companies that ignore environmental regulations. Sarah had explained, her voice heavy with concern. Your sister's practices have put the entire company at risk. Marcus Webb had grown increasingly nervous about Jessica's documentation. During a private conversation in the courthouse parking garage, he had confided his suspicions that environmental clearance documents had been altered or fabricated entirely. I can't prove it yet, Marcus had whispered, but something isn't right about these permits. The signatures look suspicious and the dates don't match EPA filing records. Nancy Foster from accounting had approached me discreetly with financial irregularities she had noticed. Nancy was a meticulous woman in her late 50s who had worked for Henderson Family Enterprises since its early days. Her loyalty to the company ran deep, but her conscience wouldn't allow her to ignore obvious problems. There are payments to consulting firms I can't verify. Nancy had told me during a lunch meeting at a quiet restaurant across town. Jessica approves these expenses, but when I try to contact the companies, the phone numbers are disconnected or go to answering services. The pieces of Jessica's fraudulent scheme were falling into place just as my phone buzzed with the news that would change everything. The EPA was planning to raid Henderson Family Enterprises within 72 hours. My choice was simple: protect my family's company by exposing Jessica's crimes or watch everything burn while staying silent. The boardroom of Henderson Family Enterprises gleamed under the fluorescent lights as 10 of Denver's most influential investors settled into their leather chairs. The mahogany conference table, polished to mirror brightness, reflected the faces of pension fund managers and private equity partners who controlled hundreds of millions in development capital. Jessica stood at the head of the table, her burgundy blazer projecting confidence she had never truly earned. Her presentation slides promised extraordinary returns on the casino expansion project, complete with glossy renderings of the proposed development. The numbers looked impressive to anyone who didn't understand the environmental liabilities lurking beneath the surface. David Kim, representing the Colorado Public Employees Pension Fund, leaned forward with obvious interest as Jessica outlined projected revenue streams. His $20 million commitment would anchor the entire project, making his opinion crucial to securing additional funding. The location offers unprecedented access to both Denver and Colorado Springs markets. Jessica declared, clicking to a slide showing traffic pattern analysis. We anticipate 7 million visitors annually within 3 years of opening. I sat quietly in the corner, taking detailed notes on every claim Jessica made. My phone recorded the meeting, legally capturing evidence that might prove crucial in the coming days. Each exaggerated promise and dismissive response to legitimate concerns would be documented thoroughly. Linda Rodriguez from Mountain West Private Equity raised her hand to ask about regulatory compliance. Her firm specialized in hospitality investments and understood the complex approval processes required for casino developments. What's the status of environmental impact assessments? Linda asked, her tone professional but probing. Gaming commissions typically require extensive soil and water analysis before approving new casino construction. Jessica's response was swift and dismissive. All environmental requirements have been satisfied. We've received preliminary approval from relevant agencies, and final permits are just a formality. I knew this was a complete fabrication. The environmental impact assessments Jessica referenced either didn't exist or contained falsified information. My stomach churned as I watched her lie to sophisticated investors who trusted Henderson Family Enterprises' reputation. Senator William Hayes sat silently at the far end of the table, his presence adding political weight to the gathering. His support for the project could smooth regulatory hurdles, but his reputation depended on backing legitimate developments. Senator Hayes had built his career on supporting responsible business practices, making him an unlikely ally for Jessica's fraudulent scheme. When Dr. Angela Thompson, an independent environmental consultant hired by the pension fund, began asking detailed questions about soil contamination analysis, Jessica's confidence started to crack. Dr. Thompson's expertise in environmental remediation made her questions particularly dangerous for Jessica's narrative. Have you conducted comprehensive soil testing for petroleum contamination? Dr. Thompson asked, consulting her notes. This site was previously occupied by automotive service facilities, which creates potential liability for underground storage tank contamination. Jessica waved off the concern with false bravado. Our geological surveys found no significant environmental issues. These are just theoretical concerns raised by environmental extremists who oppose all development. I couldn't remain silent any longer. The environmental data I had reviewed clearly showed petroleum contamination that would require millions of dollars in remediation before any construction could begin. Actually, I said, quietly raising my hand slightly. The EPA recently updated their guidelines for soil testing near former automotive facilities. Perhaps we should review the most recent environmental compliance requirements to ensure our permits meet current standards. The room fell silent as Jessica's face darkened with anger. She'd worked too hard to orchestrate this presentation to allow interference from her younger sister, especially in front of investors who controlled the project's future. April, honey. Jessica said, her voice dripping with condescension that made several investors shift uncomfortably. Stick to your little side jobs. Leave real business to professionals who understand how these things actually work. Richard nodded approvingly from his position near the window, his blind support for Jessica overriding any consideration of my valid concerns. Jessica is right, he declared firmly. Environmental compliance is complex, and we have qualified professionals handling those details. I continued taking notes as investors exchanged glances around the table. David Kim looked particularly uncomfortable with the dismissive response to legitimate environmental questions. Linda Rodriguez was typing notes on her tablet, probably documenting concerns for her investment committee. During the coffee break, I positioned myself near the hallway outside the boardroom, hoping to overhear informal conversations between investors. What I heard instead changed everything. Jessica stood in the alcove by the elevators, speaking quietly into her phone with obvious agitation. Her voice carried just enough for me to catch fragments of the conversation that made my blood run cold. "Yes, I need those environmental clearance certificates by tomorrow morning," Jessica hissed into her phone. "I don't care what they cost. $50,000 for paperwork is nothing compared to $52 million in project funding." She was arranging to purchase fraudulent environmental clearance documents. I fumbled for my phone, managing to start recording, just as Jessica continued her conversation with what was obviously a corrupt consulting firm, specializing in fake environmental compliance documentation. "Make sure the signatures look authentic." Jessica continued, unaware that her criminal conspiracy was being documented. "These investors are asking too many questions about environmental permits, and I need official-looking documentation to shut them up." The recording would provide federal prosecutors with clear evidence of Jessica's intent to defraud investors through falsified environmental compliance documents. Combined with the EPA's existing investigation, this conversation would be enough to destroy Jessica's career and possibly send her to federal prison. I slipped back into the boardroom, my mind racing with the implications of what I had just learned. Jessica wasn't just cutting corners or being careless about environmental regulations. She was actively engaging in federal crimes that could destroy Henderson Family Enterprises and bankrupt every investor in the room. I drove home from the disastrous board meeting with Jessica's recorded confession playing through my mind on repeat. The evening traffic through downtown Denver gave me time to process the magnitude of what needed to happen next. My family's business was about to collapse under the weight of Jessica's criminal negligence, and only I had the power to prevent total destruction. My apartment felt different as I unlocked the door, knowing that the next few hours would fundamentally change my family's dynamics forever. I settled at my desk and initiated a secure video call with Thomas Mitchell Jr. at Beacon Capital Management. His familiar face appeared on screen from his Manhattan office, where the time difference meant he was working late into the evening. April. Thomas said, his expression immediately serious upon seeing my face. "What's happening? You look like you've seen a ghost." I took a deep breath before delivering the news that would reshape everything. "Thomas, I need you to withdraw all $52 million from the Henderson Casino project financing. Immediately. Tonight, if possible." Thomas's eyebrows shot up in surprise. The casino project had been structured as a complex web of investments channeled through shell companies and offshore accounts, all designed to keep my identity as the primary financial backer completely hidden from my family. "That's going to trigger massive financial disruptions," Thomas warned, pulling up financial charts on his computer screen. "Henderson Family Enterprises has structured their entire expansion around that funding. Withdrawing it, Suddenly we'll freeze their credit lines and force them to default on supplier contracts. I know, I replied, feeling the weight of what I was about to unleash. But Thomas Jessica is committing federal crimes. She's buying fraudulent environmental permits and lying to investors about contaminated land. If this project proceeds, it will bankrupt everyone involved and probably send half the people in that boardroom to federal prison. Thomas nodded grimly as I explained the environmental contamination issues and Jessica's recorded confession to purchasing fake compliance documents. His expertise in sustainable investing had taught him to recognize the warning signs of environmental liability that could destroy even the largest projects. I'll start the withdrawal process immediately. Thomas said, his fingers already flying across his keyboard. The automated alerts should start reaching Henderson's accounts within 2 hours. By morning, they won't have access to any of the expansion funding. As Thomas worked, I prepared for the chaos that would inevitably follow. Henderson Family Enterprises employed 63 people whose jobs depended on continued project development. Supplier contracts worth millions of dollars would be canceled automatically when the funding disappeared, triggering penalty clauses that could drain the company's remaining cash reserves. My phone started buzzing with notifications as the financial machinery began grinding into motion. Emergency alerts appeared on Henderson's corporate banking systems as credit lines reached their limits and automatic payments began failing. Jessica would start receiving these alerts within minutes, though she wouldn't understand their true significance until morning. The irony was profound and bitter. For 2 years, my family had dismissed my business education and financial expertise, while unknowingly depending entirely on my success for their continued prosperity. Jessica's supposedly brilliant expansion project was actually funded by the sister she had publicly humiliated just hours earlier. Richard's construction empire, built over 30 years of hard work and smart decisions, was about to discover that his favorite daughter had been gambling everything on investments backed by the child he had repeatedly dismissed. The financial house of cards Jessica had constructed would collapse within hours, taking with it any illusion of her business competence. I spent the rest of the evening coordinating with environmental lawyers to time the EPA investigation perfectly with the financial crisis. Sarah Morrison and her legal team had agreed to offer Henderson Family Enterprises immunity from criminal prosecution in exchange for full cooperation with the federal investigation and a commitment to environmental remediation. Dr. Patricia Wang connected me with an international consortium of sustainable building companies interested in acquiring distressed construction firms with potential for environmental leadership. The preliminary discussions suggested that Henderson Family Enterprises could be worth more as an ethical company than it ever was under Jessica's reckless leadership. My investment portfolio was positioned to benefit regardless of what happened to the family business. Shares in Morrison Construction, the sustainable building company I had been quietly supporting, would surge once Henderson's environmental violations became public knowledge. My renewable energy investments were generating enough passive income to support myself independently of any family financial arrangements. The call I had been dreading came at 11:30 that evening. My phone displayed Richard's number, and I could hear the panic in his voice before I even finished saying hello. "April, something terrible is happening to our accounts," Richard said, his voice strained with confusion and fear. "The bank is saying our credit lines are frozen and our project funding has been withdrawn. They won't tell me who authorized this or how to fix it." "What did Jessica say when you called her?" I asked, maintaining careful neutrality while documenting his response for future reference. "She's not answering her phone," Richard replied, frustration evident in his tone. "April, I know we haven't always appreciated your education, but do you have any contacts in banking who might help us understand what's happening?" The temptation to reveal everything immediately was overwhelming, but I knew the timing had to be perfect. The EPA raid was scheduled for the following morning, and Jessica needed to be caught completely off guard to prevent her from destroying evidence or fleeing. "I'll make some calls," I promised my father, already knowing that the only solution would require removing Jessica from leadership entirely. Dad, try to get some sleep. We'll figure this out tomorrow. As I ended the call, my phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus Webb. Emergency board meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m. Richard is demanding answers about the funding crisis. Can you attend? I smiled grimly as I typed my response, I'll be there. And Marcus, you might want to bring your resignation letter. Things are about to get very complicated for everyone who enabled Jessica's fraud. The stage was set for Jessica's complete downfall, and this time there would be no dismissive comments about leaving business to professionals. Tomorrow, my family would learn exactly who the real professional had been all along. The call that shattered what remained of Jessica's world came at 6:15 the next morning. I was already dressed and reviewing final preparations for the emergency board meeting when my father's panicked voice echoed through my apartment. April, your father is in the hospital. Carol's trembling voice replaced Richard's on the line. He had chest pains around 5 this morning. The doctors think it's a mild heart attack brought on by stress. I rushed to Denver General Hospital, arriving to find our family gathered in the cardiac care waiting room. Jessica sat rigid in an uncomfortable chair, her phone pressed to her ear as she desperately tried to contact suppliers and investors. The confident woman from yesterday's board meeting had vanished, replaced by someone whose carefully constructed world was crumbling in real time. The doctors say he's stable. Carol explained, her eyes red from crying. But the financial stress triggered this episode. April, what's happening to our company? Jessica says someone is sabotaging us, but she won't explain how or why. Through the hospital window, I could see federal vehicles pulling into the Henderson Family Enterprises parking lot 4 blocks away. EPA investigators and FBI agents were executing search warrants at that very moment, seizing computers and documents that would expose the full extent of Jessica's fraudulent activities. Marcus Webb arrived at the hospital within an hour, his face grim as he delivered news that made Jessica's situation infinitely worse. They've arrested 3 people at the company, he announced quietly, glancing around the waiting room to ensure privacy. Environmental document fraud, conspiracy to defraud investors, and obstruction of justice. Jessica's face went pale as the implications hit her. The fake environmental consulting firm she had contacted yesterday had been under federal surveillance for months. Her recorded phone conversation requesting fraudulent permits was just the latest evidence in a comprehensive case against a criminal network that specialized in helping construction companies bypass environmental regulations. What does this mean for the company? Carol asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Henderson Family Enterprises is facing potential criminal charges. Marcus explained, his legal training evident in his careful word choices. However, there may be opportunities for cooperation that could protect the company and its employees. I knew that Marcus was referring to the immunity deal I had helped negotiate through Sarah Morrison's law firm. The federal prosecutors were more interested in the broader criminal network than destroying a family business that could serve as a model for environmental compliance reform. Dr. Patricia Wang arrived unexpectedly, having driven from Boulder as soon as she heard about Richard's hospitalization. Her presence provided comfort and reminded me that this crisis was also an opportunity to rebuild Henderson Family Enterprises, according to ethical principles that could benefit everyone. April. Dr. Wang said quietly, pulling me aside in the hospital corridor, the international consortium I mentioned is very interested in this situation. They see Henderson's crisis as an opportunity to demonstrate that environmental responsibility creates rather than destroys business value. Jessica's revenge plot began unfolding that afternoon as she met secretly with corrupt contractor Tony Valdez in the hospital parking garage. I watched from the window as Jessica handed Tony a manila envelope, obviously containing payment for services that would involve framing me for the environmental violations. What Jessica didn't know was that the FBI had been monitoring Tony Valdez for months as part of their broader investigation into construction industry corruption. Her meeting with him was being photographed and recorded by federal agents who were building an airtight case against everyone involved in the criminal network. Nancy Foster arrived at the hospital that evening with boxes of financial records she had been secretly copying for weeks. Her loyalty to Henderson Family Enterprises ran deeper than her fear of Jessica's retaliation, and she was determined to help save the jobs of her colleagues. "I've been documenting irregular payments and forged documents for months," Nancy explained to Marcus and me in the hospital cafeteria. "Jessica threatened to fire me if I questioned her accounting methods, but I couldn't ignore obvious fraud." The financial records Nancy provided showed a pattern of corruption extending far beyond the casino project. Jessica had been skimming money from multiple projects using shell companies to hide kickbacks and embezzling funds that should have gone to environmental compliance and worker safety programs. Richard's cardiologist allowed family visits that evening, and I sat beside my father's hospital bed as he struggled to understand how his business empire had been built on criminal fraud. The monitors attached to his chest beeped steadily as he processed the devastating news about Jessica's activities. "I trusted her completely," Richard whispered, his voice weak but clear. "April, I owe you an apology that I can never adequately express. You tried to warn us, and we dismissed your concerns as inexperience." Carol held Richard's hand as he continued speaking, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Your education, your environmental knowledge, your financial expertise. We should have been celebrating your achievements instead of diminishing them." The family therapy session arranged by the hospital social worker became a turning point in our relationships. For the first time in my life, Richard acknowledged that his favoritism toward Jessica had been based on outdated assumptions about gender roles in business rather than actual competence or character. "I thought Jessica's aggressive style meant she was strong," Richard admitted, looking directly at me. "But real strength is having the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult. You've shown that kind of strength, and I've been too blind to see it." Jessica's arrest came at 9:45 that evening, just as visiting hours were ending. FBI agents arrived at the hospital with handcuffs and federal warrants, charging her with fraud conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Her revenge plot against me had backfired spectacularly when the FBI revealed they had been monitoring her communications for weeks. "Jessica Henderson, you're under arrest," the lead agent announced as Jessica stood frozen in shock beside our father's hospital bed. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The sight of my sister being handcuffed and read her Miranda rights in front of our hospitalized father was devastating despite everything she had done. Carol sobbed openly as Jessica was led away, her designer business suit replaced by the harsh reality of federal criminal charges. Richard's heart monitor showed increased stress as the gravity of the situation fully hit him. His daughter, the child he had groomed to take over his business, was facing years in federal prison for crimes that could have destroyed everything he had spent his lifetime building. "April," Richard said weakly as the FBI agents left with Jessica, "can you save the company? Can you save the jobs of all those people who trusted us?" I squeezed his hand gently, knowing that the next phase of this crisis would determine whether Henderson Family Enterprises survived or joined the long list of family businesses destroyed by corruption and mismanagement. "Yes, Dad," I replied confidently. "I can save it, but we're going to do it the right way this time." Standing in the empty Henderson Family Enterprises office building 3 weeks later, I faced the most challenging decision of my professional life. The federal investigation had cleared the company of criminal liability in exchange for full cooperation, but 63 employees still faced unemployment unless someone stepped forward to rebuild everything from scratch. The morning sun streamed through the windows of what had been Jessica's corner office, now stripped of the expensive furniture and fraudulent documents that had once projected false success. Only 5 core employees remained: Nancy Foster, Marcus Webb Foreman, Jake Sullivan, and 2 administrative assistants who had been with the company since its early days. My comprehensive business plan for transforming Henderson Family Enterprises into a sustainable construction company lay open on the conference table, its pages filled with partnerships with renewable energy firms and innovative green technology companies. Dr. Patricia Wang had connected me with experts in environmental construction methods who were eager to establish Colorado operations. The international consortium is prepared to invest $200 million. I explained to the small group of remaining employees, but only if we commit completely to environmental leadership and ethical business practices. No cutting corners, no regulatory shortcuts, no compromise on safety or compliance. Nancy Foster, now serving as interim chief financial officer, reviewed the financial projections with obvious relief. April, this plan would create more jobs than we ever had under the old system. And the profit margins are actually higher because we're not paying fines and legal costs constantly. Jake Sullivan, who had supervised construction crews for Henderson Family Enterprises for 15 years, was particularly excited about the retraining programs for environmental construction methods. His workers would learn cutting-edge techniques for building energy-efficient structures, using sustainable materials and renewable energy systems. My guys have been wanting to learn this stuff for years, Jake explained enthusiastically. We kept hearing about these new methods, but Jessica always said they were too expensive and complicated. Turns out, they actually save money and produce better buildings. Marcus Webb had decided to transition his legal practice to focus exclusively on environmental law, inspired by witnessing the positive transformation happening at Henderson. His experience with construction law combined with environmental expertise would make him invaluable to other companies seeking to improve their compliance practices. The community outreach programs I had designed were already generating positive responses from environmental justice organizations throughout Denver. Henderson's commitment to remediate contaminated sites and develop green spaces in underserved neighborhoods was rebuilding trust that Jessica's crimes had destroyed. We're not just fixing our own mistakes, I explained to a gathering of community leaders in the renovated conference room. We're taking responsibility for the broader environmental damage caused by decades of irresponsible construction practices throughout Colorado. The scholarship programs for students interested in green construction had attracted applications from 3 local high schools and 2 community colleges. These young people would graduate with skills in renewable energy installation, sustainable building design, and environmental remediation, jobs that would only become more valuable as environmental regulations tightened. Richard's recovery had accelerated once he understood that the company would not only survive, but thrive under ethical leadership. His pride in my achievements was evident during his first visit to the renovated offices, where he marveled at the sophisticated environmental monitoring equipment and sustainable building materials on display. "This is what I should have been building all along," Richard admitted as we walked through the new training facility where employees were learning to install solar panels and geothermal heating systems. "April, you've turned our biggest weakness into our greatest strength." Carol had found her own role in the transformation, serving as the company's community relations director. Her natural empathy and communication skills were perfect for rebuilding relationships with neighborhoods that had been damaged by previous Henderson projects. My personal life was also flourishing as my relationship with Daniel Rodriguez deepened through our collaboration on environmental remediation projects. Daniel was a brilliant environmental engineer whose respect for my courage and integrity formed the foundation of something much more meaningful than professional partnership. "You could have walked away from all of this," Daniel said as we reviewed soil restoration progress at the former casino site. "Most people would have taken their money and started fresh somewhere else. But you chose to fight for what was right, even when it meant confronting your own family." The romantic subplot that developed between Daniel and me felt natural and earned, built on shared values and mutual respect rather than convenience or superficial attraction. Our engagement announcement at the company's first annual environmental impact celebration represented the integration of personal happiness with professional success. The Henderson Rodriguez Environmental Construction Company officially launched 6 months after Jessica's arrest with me, serving as chief executive officer of an organization now worth $350 million. 120 employees worked throughout Colorado on projects that demonstrated how environmental responsibility could create, rather than limit, business opportunities. Industry recognition came quickly as environmental groups and business organizations celebrated our transformation from a source of regulatory violations into a model of sustainable construction practices. Speaking invitations from universities and professional conferences provided platforms to share our story and encourage other family businesses to embrace ethical practices. The most satisfying moment came when David Kim, the pension fund manager from that disastrous board meeting, called to request a meeting about investing in Henderson Rodriguez Environmental Construction. "April," David said as we sat in my new office decorated with living plants and natural lighting, "what you've accomplished here is remarkable. We'd like to invest $50 million in expanding your sustainable construction methods throughout the Mountain West region." Linda Rodriguez from Mountain West Private Equity made a similar call, acknowledging that she had been wrong to dismiss environmental concerns as obstacles to profitability. "You've proven that doing the right thing can also be the most profitable thing," she admitted. The climactic twist that would reshape my life completely came during a video conference with the International Sustainable Building Consortium. The offer they presented exceeded my wildest expectations and validated every difficult decision I had made throughout this ordeal. "We want to acquire Henderson Rodriguez Environmental Construction for $200 million, the consortium leader announced, "but only if you agree to lead the merged company as chief executive officer of our North American operations." The position would make me responsible for sustainable construction projects throughout the United States and Canada, with authority over budgets exceeding $1 billion annually. It represented complete vindication of my business education, environmental expertise, and leadership capabilities. More importantly, the merger would create jobs for every Henderson Family Enterprises employee who wanted to continue working along with hundreds of additional positions in environmental construction throughout the region. The company that Jessica had nearly destroyed through criminal negligence would become the foundation for an environmental construction revolution. As I prepared to sign the merger agreement, I reflected on the journey from humiliation to triumph that had brought me to this moment. Being underestimated by my family had forced me to develop capabilities they could never have imagined, and their dismissive attitude had motivated me to achieve success beyond anything they thought possible. The recording of Jessica sneering, "Stick to your little side jobs," now seemed almost comical in light of how those side jobs had generated the wealth and expertise necessary to save everything Richard had built. Her arrogance had blinded her to the reality that I had surpassed her achievements years ago while working in the shadows. The federal courthouse in downtown Denver buzzed with activity as I walked through its marble corridors toward the sentencing hearing that would close the most painful chapter of my family's history. Despite everything Jessica had done, I carried with me a letter requesting leniency, not because she deserved forgiveness, but because holding on to anger would poison the positive transformation happening throughout our lives. Jessica's sentencing hearing lasted 3 hours, during which federal prosecutors detailed the scope of her environmental crimes and the potential damage her fraudulent casino project could have caused to groundwater supplies serving thousands of Denver residents. The judge's questions were pointed and serious, reflecting the gravity of corporate environmental crimes in an era of increasing climate awareness. Ms. Henderson, Judge Patricia Williams said as Jessica stood before the bench in an orange jumpsuit that looked surreal compared to her former designer business attire, "Your crimes represent a betrayal of public trust that could have resulted in environmental damage lasting decades." The 18-month federal sentence with possibility of early release reflected both the seriousness of Jessica's crimes and the mitigating factor of Henderson Family Enterprises' complete cooperation with the investigation. My letter requesting leniency had emphasized Jessica's potential for rehabilitation and the positive changes happening within our family business. Outside the courthouse, I met with Sarah Morrison and the legal team that had negotiated the immunity agreement protecting Henderson Family Enterprises from criminal liability. The Environmental Restoration Fund we had established was already funding cleanup projects at contaminated sites throughout Colorado. Your cooperation prevented a much larger environmental disaster, Sarah explained as we reviewed the final settlement documents. The FBI used information from Henderson's case to shut down the entire network of companies selling fraudulent environmental permits. The business transformation was now complete, with Henderson Rodriguez Environmental Construction officially recognized as Colorado's leading sustainable building company. Our portfolio included remediation projects at 23 contaminated sites, construction of 5 energy-efficient affordable housing developments, and installation of solar panel systems at 12 schools throughout the Denver metro area. The company's first annual environmental impact report showed results that exceeded even our most optimistic projections. 500 jobs had been created in the environmental construction sector, with starting salaries 20% higher than traditional construction work due to the specialized skills required. Richard's complete recovery and transformation into an advocate for environmental business practices provided the family reconciliation I had hoped for, but never expected. His public acknowledgement of my superior business judgment had been featured in several business publications, helping to establish my reputation as a leader in sustainable construction. April, I spent 30 years building a construction company the wrong way, Richard said during our first father-daughter interview for Colorado Business Magazine. My daughter taught me that environmental responsibility isn't a burden on business. It's the foundation of sustainable prosperity. The University of Colorado had approached me about establishing the April Henderson School of Sustainable Business, using Henderson Rodriguez as a case study in ethical business transformation. The program would teach future business leaders that environmental stewardship and financial success were not competing goals but complementary aspects of responsible leadership. Carol's role as Community Relations Director had evolved into something resembling social work as she coordinated programs connecting environmental construction jobs with residents of neighborhoods historically harmed by industrial pollution. Her natural empathy and communication skills were healing relationships that predatory business practices had damaged for decades. Marcus Webb's Environmental Law Clinic at the University of Denver was providing free legal services to communities fighting environmental contamination, while training law students in the intersection of environmental protection and business ethics. His experience with the Henderson case had made him a leading expert in corporate environmental compliance. Nancy Foster's financial expertise had earned her positions on 3 corporate boards, where she advocated for transparency and accountability in environmental reporting. Her willingness to risk her career by documenting Jessica's fraud had inspired other accounting professionals to prioritize ethical responsibility over employer loyalty. Dr. Patricia Wang's collaboration with Henderson Rodriguez had led to international consulting opportunities as universities and corporations sought her expertise in sustainable business transformation. Our success story was being studied in business schools throughout North America as proof that environmental leadership creates competitive advantage. Thomas Mitchell Jr.'s Sustainable Investment Fund had grown to manage over $2 billion in assets, with Henderson Rodriguez Environmental Construction serving as the flagship example of profitable environmental investing. His expertise had attracted institutional investors who wanted to support companies that prioritize long-term sustainability over short-term profits. My relationship with Daniel Rodriguez had evolved into a partnership that balanced professional collaboration with personal happiness. Our engagement represented the integration of shared values and mutual respect that had been missing from my family relationships for most of my life. You taught me that fighting for principles creates stronger relationships than avoiding conflict, Daniel said during our engagement party at the company's restored headquarters building. Watching you stand up to your family showed me what real courage looks like. The The community impact of our transformation extended far beyond business metrics, as environmental construction projects improved air quality, reduced energy costs, and created green spaces in neighborhoods that had been environmental justice sacrifices for decades. The Denver Post had featured Henderson Rodriguez Environmental Construction as its Company of the Year, highlighting our role in demonstrating that environmental responsibility could revitalize both urban neighborhoods and rural communities throughout Colorado. Senator William Hayes, who had witnessed Jessica's original fraudulent presentation to investors, now served as an advisory board member for Henderson Rodriguez, helping to shape environmental policy that supported sustainable construction practices without stifling economic development. The International Sustainable Building Consortium had exceeded their original investment commitment, providing $400 million for expanding Henderson Rodriguez operations throughout the western United States. Projects were underway in California, Oregon, Washington, Arizona, and New Mexico, creating thousands of jobs in environmental construction and renewable energy installation. Jessica's early release from federal prison after serving 14 months had led to her enrollment in an environmental law program at Denver University, where she was studying to become an advocate for corporate environmental compliance. Her transformation from environmental criminal to environmental advocate represented the kind of redemption that our justice system aspired to achieve. April. Jessica said during our first conversation following her release, "I owe you an apology that will take the rest of my life to deliver adequately. You saved our family's business and probably prevented me from committing even worse crimes." The reconciliation with Jessica was gradual and careful, built on her demonstrated commitment to understanding the environmental damage her crimes could have caused. Her work with environmental justice organizations was providing restitution to communities harmed by irresponsible construction practices. Standing in the renovated boardroom where Jessica had once sneered at my environmental concerns, I addressed the quarterly meeting of Henderson Rodriguez Environmental Construction's Board of Directors. The room was now filled with living plants, natural lighting, and displays showing real-time environmental impact data from our construction projects. This quarter, Henderson Rodriguez Environmental Construction achieved record profits while reducing our carbon footprint by 30% and creating 250 new jobs in sustainable construction. I announced to board members, who included former skeptics now converted to environmental advocates. The company's success metrics told a story of transformation that exceeded financial projections. Employee satisfaction ratings were the highest in Colorado's construction industry. Customer retention approached 100%, and environmental impact scores set new standards for sustainable building practices. The life lesson that emerged from this ordeal was profound and universally applicable. Authentic strength comes from standing up for principles, even when doing so requires confronting family-challenging established systems and risking personal relationships. Environmental responsibility and financial success are not competing goals, but complementary aspects of business practices that create value for everyone. My closing thoughts as I reflected on the journey from humiliation to triumph emphasize that being underestimated can become a tremendous advantage when it motivates you to develop capabilities others can't imagine. Success built on truth and justice creates lasting prosperity that benefits entire communities, rather than enriching individuals at the expense of others. The Henderson family enterprises that Richard built through 30 years of hard work had been saved and transformed into something far more valuable than its original form. Henderson Rodriguez Environmental Construction now employed 400 people throughout the western United States, generated annual revenues exceeding $600 million, and served as a model for sustainable construction practices worldwide. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where family members dismissed your expertise or education? How did you handle being underestimated by people who should have supported your achievements? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Your experiences might inspire others who are facing similar challenges with family dynamics and professional recognition. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to support family revenge stories that show how intelligence and integrity can triumph over arrogance and corruption. Don't forget to subscribe for more family revenge stories about people who refused to accept dismissive treatment and fought back to achieve extraordinary success. Share this video with anyone who needs inspiration to stand up for their principles, even when it means confronting family members who underestimate their capabilities. Thank you for listening to this story of transformation from dismissal to triumph. Remember that your education, expertise, and values have power beyond what others might recognize. Sometimes the people who should support us the most are the ones who need to witness our success before they understand our worth. Keep fighting for what's right, and may your own journey lead to the recognition and respect you deserve.